talk about you at one point promoted the high carb diets for a while, right? Tell me a little bit about tell me a little bit about that, and then I think what changed your mind.
So I started running in the late 1960s, early 70s, and I started my physiology training in medicine in 1970. And that was one of the first years that the new theory arose that muscle glycogen, i.e. carbohydrates in the muscle, was the single factor determining athletic performance.
Wow.
And that's how it was projected to all of us. And so now I'm a young student studying physiology in medicine, and I'm running marathons, and I discover this, and that this is the most exciting piece of information I heard in the whole medical training. So I started promoting this high carbohydrate diet in the early 1970s. And I then, of course, adopted that diet. And then I went and did my medical training, completed my medical training, and I was surrounded by cardiologists who were telling us that if you eat fat, you're going to die. So I was going to eat lots of carbohydrate, and it was going to make me run better. Well, in fact, it made me run worse, and I got fatter and progressively sicker. And then in 1981, my father was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and he died 10 years later. And eventually I discovered that I also had type 2 diabetes.
Wow.
And I realized I've got 10 years to sort this problem out, or else I'm going to die like he did. And that fortunately forced me to look very seriously into what was going on in the evidence. And I came across a book called The New Atkins for a New You, written by Drs. Westman, Volek, and Finney. And within 2 hours of reading that book, I said, oh my gosh, I got it completely wrong for 33 years.
Wow.
And within 2 hours, I started changing my diet, and the results were spectacular. And I haven't looked back for 7.5 years. So that's how it all started. And then initially I was very reluctant to say anything about it because I knew there'd be a backlash, and I knew that I would be vilified, but I didn't realize the extent to which I'd be vilified. And so I was very cautious initially, but then eventually it came out, and then the problems arose. And then my colleagues attacked me, and that's been 7 years of attacks.
Wow. Yeah, I saw that. That was ridiculous. I want to talk about you wrote this book on waterlogged, which is fascinating because there's this whole, I don't know, it's like one of those things that everyone knows that you need to drink a lot of water, drink more water, keep drinking water. Where did this come from? Is it just made up?
And so it was industry. Industry brainwashed people to believe, and that's again the problem we have with our nutrition story. Industry brainwashed us to believe certain things which are simply not true.
Hey, for those of you who are watching, what we're talking about is when you drink too much water, you're going to dilute certain electrolytes, especially potassium. And what's going to happen is you need potassium for the heart to work, to balance fluids in the brain. So if you drink too much water, it's called hyponatremia, right? And your brain can swell. It can really be dangerous.
And it can die. And there have been at least 15 deaths in runners and triathletes, and particularly in the military, which is really interesting because the biggest incidence has been in the military. And they finally this year. So that we described the condition in 1981, and now it's 2018. The first time in history, the US military said if a patient comes in and you think they've got a heat illness and they're confused, you may not give them fluids until you measure their blood sodium concentration.
Wow.
Now, we did that in 1985 or 86. That's how long it takes for change to occur.
So just so you guys know, Professor Noakes is the top researcher on this data, exercise-associated hyponatremia. You've done some articles on this research a lot, right?
Yeah, we were the first to describe it. It occurred in a lady in the 1981 Comrades Marathon, which is a 90-kilometer, 56-mile race in South Africa. And she wrote to me after the race because she'd been unconscious for 4 days. So here she starts this race completely healthy. And then she's unconscious. And she wrote to me a week later or so when she'd regained consciousness. She said, what happened? She said, all I know is my sodium went down. And so then we knew the hyponatremia. And that was the first case. And we collected a whole series of cases. And just by talking to the patients, you could see that they drank a lot. And there was clear evidence that one of them, for example, was a lady with anorexia nervosa who was very sensitive about her weight. And she said, but you know, Prof, I put on 4 kilograms during this Ironman. And I knew I had to believe her because she would be, she would know what her weight change was. And another guy told me he'd passed like about 6 liters of urine in recovery. So then we were getting an idea. Then we did an investigation where we hospitalized 8 patients with the condition. These people were near death in the Comrades Marathon. And we studied them during recovery, and we could show that they all passed an excess of urine. And that average, the worst case was a guy who had excreted 6 liters of extra fluid. So he'd increased his body weight by 6 kilograms.
Wow.
So then we knew, and we published that paper in the Journal of Applied Physiology. And I thought, well, that's the end. We proved what causes it. It's going to go away. Well, actually, no, because there were scientists who were being encouraged to say that this was nonsensical research and dehydration is the real problem. And if you tell people to underdrink, they'll all die of dehydration. And that was the argument. And industry was driving it. And then the American College of Sports Medicine brought up the new guidelines in 1996, and they said you must drink ahead of thirst, essentially to drink as much as tolerable. That was the ruling. That was the advice. And there's no biology that tells you that you must drink to as much as tolerable.
Right. So we have to drink when we're thirsty, right? That's the common sense type solution.
Yeah, absolutely correct. And that's how all animals drink. And so why should humans be different? But we...
Right. Yeah. So let's touch on this common thing that people, like athletes, that keep asking me, yes, but if I lower my carbs, I'll lower my performance when I'm working out or I'm doing athletic activities. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, okay. I think that we have to realize that 99.9% of athletes are recreational athletes, and that's the point. So when we talk about the 0.1% who are competing in the Olympics at short distances, say up to 5 or 10 kilometers, yes, I think there may well be a role for some carbohydrates in them. But for the recreational athletes, really, if you run a minute faster or a minute slower, that's not important. What's important is your long-term health. And what worries me is that there are a lot of athletes like myself who eat a high carbohydrate diet and then damage themselves for life. And that's the issue. And I think actually most ultra distance runners, even if they're eating a higher carbohydrate diet, are probably fat adapted because they do a lot of training in a carbohydrate depleted state. Because if they wouldn't, they couldn't do what they do.
Right.
They don't understand that they are actually significantly fat adapted, even though they're eating, or they think they're eating, a high carbohydrate diet.
Fascinating. And so you tap out the glycogen reserve, and then sometimes they'll hit this wall, call it the bonk or something.
Correct. And that's when you want to be burning fat. And then if you're fat adapted, you can just carry on all day. So to answer your first question, if you're probably fat adapted, you don't need to eat.
And then the other question I have, there's another concept of that if you eat too much fat, people are going to say this, well, aren't I going to increase my cholesterol? Am I going to die of a heart attack? Can you touch on that point?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked that question, because I would encourage everyone to go to the Virta Health, VIRTA Health website. And Virta Health has just completed the first year of a 2 or 3 year study in which they fed high-fat diets to diabetics. Now, okay, so you get better, and 60% put their diabetes into remission. But more importantly, they measured 24 markers of cardiovascular health, 24 markers. 23 improved more in the high-fat group than in the conventionally treated group eating the high-carbohydrate diet. The only one was cholesterol, the so-called cholesterol. Cholesterol has no predictive value in heart disease anyway.